Well, that's me almost revitalised. Part of the way through my second cup of tea and now shaking the clouds of sleep from my head. Oh, well, I'm describing it as bloody sleep. Anyway, it wasn't a sleep, it was a nap. I had the Welfare All-Stars after-show self-congratulatory 3-hour pat on the back going on in the same room that I was trying to grab bloody 40 winks in. So the fact that I managed to get to sleep at all was a complete miracle. Boy, that's not can bloody talk. Jesus wept. Yes, as I say, I fell walking the Derbyshire Peaks. God knows what hour this morning, sometime just very shortly after dawn. Was going to go up to Arbor Low, but we jumped out the car at some of the lower fells and took a walk up the hillside, and by the time we got kind of halfway up the hillside, the upper part of the hillside was actually in the cloud, and I think Arbor Low was probably another kind of 300 or 400 feet further up in altitude, and having visited Arbor Low in that kind of weather before, I wasn't too keen to do it again. Yes. The vista at Arbor Low, when you're standing up there on a clear day, is about 20 miles in all directions of just pure green scenery. But if you go up there in that weather, you can't even see the person that you're standing next to. It's like, I don't know, yeah, something pretty powerful about that place. But best pick a good day to go and experience it. So we stumbled back from the fell, having been beaten back by the low cloud base, and puffed our way back home. So I was driving back home at what time did I get back here? About 10:30 this morning, I think. I've just been trying to start getting things ready for the Welfare All-Stars show. Lucky me. And then Charlie was supposed to be engineering for me, so that I could possibly grab a few hours between getting things set up for her and the folks, and I went to come to her at 9, and Charlie managed to press the wrong button in Sam, and everything went horribly wrong. So my grabbing some sleep during the Welfare All-Stars show didn't happen either, as I was jumping around from foot to foot trying to correct erroneously pushed buttons in Sam. I was really grateful for the level of interest and interaction about last week's show about mental health issues, dealing with sort of interactions with psychiatrists, and about SSRIs, and just a fabulous input from Shaziz last week, telling some fairly grim tales about the number of his family members that have committed suicide over the years, and the various potential impacts that the medications that they were on at the time, the psychiatric medications that they were on at the time or had just recently stopped taking, could possibly have had in those suicides. Very bold of him to come on as well and make admissions publicly about his own mental health, which is something that none of us ever find particularly easy, but it does have to be put out there. It's so prevalent and yet so little spoken about. So, great show again from the Welfare All-Stars earlier today. Really nice to hear Wild Swan taking a more active role in the All-Star team, coming in on the general chat as well. I think her opinions are well-founded and valid about most of the things that I hear her talk about. So, good on you, Wild Swan, and the rest of the team, excellent. The recording of last week's show has seen quite a remarkable level of interest on my YouTube channel and through my pod player on the Weebly site. So I'm going to attempt to do a second part to the parts that I was covering last week around mental health and emotional well-being, and move on to more the specific things that somebody who is in a you see, the things again there, I have to qualify this that we're really mental health issues are a spectrum, and essentially we're all somewhere on that spectrum. that mental health issues include happiness. So in mental health issues, the emotional state of one's mind, the emotional capacity of one's mind, the capacity for rational thinking, the capacity for acting appropriately according to life stimuli, isn't necessarily always about mental disease and mental disorder. That I feel that many of the descriptions of mental health disorders are in fact perfectly natural, appropriate responses to certain circumstances in life. After the death of a parent or a child, it's an entirely appropriate response to go into a period of mourning and to suffer a period of very low mood, of great grave introversion. And even we lost our puppy recently, and not the one of the most poignant things was that where her sister, who we had with her as a litter mate from a pup, witnessed her sister's death and was entirely with the family during that period. It was very interesting to watch not only the human family grieving for the loss of this dog, but also to see her dog family grieving. And Tubby, although she was also afflicted by the same disease that appeared to have killed her sister, was poorly at the time. She wasn't very poorly, and I would suggest that the majority of the change in her behaviour over the weeks that followed were an entirely natural version of what humans would suffer as depression. And yet I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say that that she was depressed, more aggrieved, and her life had changed. Her expectations of daily life were now suddenly radically different, where going out for a wee in the morning used to be fun with her sister. Now it's just having a wee. And this is my point, really, is that we all need time to adjust. That when traumatic things happen, when sudden changes happen in our lives, there'll always be a period of adjustment. And sometimes accompanying that period of adjustment may come a period of, how should we describe it, emotional instability, where we find that our normally steady moods are suddenly flying, where we'll go from the heights of ecstasy to the depths of tragedy on a moment-to-moment basis, and life becomes very much a roller coaster ride. And sometimes even nothing at all like that. Certainly with some of my bereavements that I've had with my family members, the main overwhelming sensation at the time has been one of complete numbness, of an incapacity to have any emotional connection with what has just happened. Gutted comes to mind. That's certainly a very powerful description of how we feel when our hopes, our dreams, our desires have been obstructed, frustrated by life. So I'm not just talking about bereavement or loss, or the split up of a relationship. These sort of things happen to us on a day-to-day basis, and what we have this kind of persistently happy model of what it should be like to be alive, presented to us by the TV and by the radio, and so we have this expectation from society that we should have that plastered grin on our face at all times, and that everything should be enjoyable and should be fun. And it's always been my feeling about a utopian a utopian world is that it would be a very damn boring place, and that this is one of the things that has struck me about the kind of roller coaster of my life, is that I would never have had the incredible highs that I've had unless I'd experienced the incredible lows that I'd had, and that these were part of a natural cycle of hard knocks of life are the learning tools, they're the education, that's your life school A-levels, if you like. and the ability to rise above those knocks is really your life school degree. You know what I mean? This is your pass in life schoolness. You know what I mean? If you can manage the knocks in life and to flow through them and to rise above them and to carry on, you know what I mean? Carry on regardless, then that's, you know what I mean, that's really what the school of life is all about. And also, to an extent, I think this is where an awful lot of emotional health, mental health issues actually stem from, is that fear of going through those real troughs. And in my experience, this is a trap for the unwitting mind. That when we feel ourselves heading for a trough, we will backpedal, we will bail like mad to try and save ourselves from this hideous looming blackness in our lives, when in fact, if we were to embrace the fact that this was a purely natural cycle of emotional events, and to simply travel through that low point, it is very much like a roller coaster ride. If you don't get enough impetus on the downhill parts, there won't be enough to carry you through to the heights of the uphill parts. And this is very much the same with life, that it's almost a case of embracing whatever comes, good, bad or indifferent, and riding with it and making the most of it, that actually enables the passage of stuff through your life, you know what I mean, of life through your life. That any time that you try and prevent or sidestep a bad feeling, that essentially kind of locks that part of yourself into some kind of a repeated cycle of avoidance. And that in fact, if you kind of embrace that darkness and absorb it and examine it objectively, you know what I mean, with indifference, examine your own grief as a third party observer, examine your own grief as if you were a friend looking over the shoulder of an upset loved one. You know what I mean? Consider yourself to be the observed rather than the observer, and suddenly the mind's perspective is zoomed out by an extra factor, and suddenly we become the observer of our life's works rather than the doer of them. And in this kind of elevated mental state, we can study our actions and often learn an awful lot more from our behaviour than simply by you know what I mean, being in that behaviour. If we simply dwell within our behaviour and never examine it as an impartial observer, then we simply are automata. We're robots. And that's really what I want to get onto tonight, is just the incredible power of some of the modern talking therapy, psychiatric tools like CBT, Cognitive Behaviour Therapy, and the ability for somebody with a reasonable level, a reasonable grasp of kind of logical deduction to be able to overcome most, if not all, mental and emotional difficulties by understanding the nature of, it's known as hemisync, when the left and right brains are connected where previously they were disconnected, and this is a purely intellectual exercise. There's also synaptic remapping, which is an important part of CBT, Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, where a physical oh my god, why am my level so low? I must be whispering, guys. Terribly sorry about that. I'll just turn myself home. But yeah, where essentially the actions of the physical body are mapped and mimicked by the synapses of the brain, and that by taking conscious, like a conscious planning role, like a council planning official planning some new road layout. We can quite literally plan and remap our own brains. Right, okay, the incredible power of the principles of cognitive behavioural therapy to change how you think and feel. And now this isn't like some kind of NLP weirdness where anybody else will be imposing how you should think or feel on you. the beauty of CBT and hemi-syncing in general is that what actually happens is that in the reuniting of the left and right hemispheres of the brain, which become incredibly separated, especially in adult men, we're very much densians of one half or the other half of our brains, and rarely ever actually occupy them both simultaneously, especially men occupied in sort of technical professions, where kind of logical thinking is involved. Essentially the brain is separated into the two hemispheres, the right and left hemisphere. The left hemisphere, generally speaking, is dominant in right-handed men and right-handed people generally, and is generally dominant in rational, logical, deductive activities. And the left brain is generally considered to be our more artistic, creative side of our brain, responsible for, art, poetry, music, etc. I have a squeaking puppy outside my door. I'm going to have to close the door. Why is there a squeaking puppy outside my door? Right. Okay. Yeah. The left and right hemispheres tend to be segregated by our separation of the arts and the sciences. When we're schooled, we are put in art class, and then we are put in science class, and then we are put in English class, and we don't generally tend to draw on our books when we're in English class. We don't tend to create artworks out of chemistry sets, and so you can see this sort of compartmentalisation that is inbuilt into the comprehensive education system, and also into our kind of life choices and the career choices that we make, and the skills and talents that we need to apply to those career choices. Now, the issue with this being is that in the event of, I'm going to use a traumatic event. This doesn't necessarily have to be a car crash or a death. Or a traumatic event is essentially anything that leaves you bereft, anything that leaves you feeling unable to go on, I guess. And that can be, if you're really skint and facing eviction, a big bill can be pretty bloody traumatic if you know that there's no way of you avoiding it. If you've got your meters on the outside of your house or whatever, and you know that the electric or the gas can just come around and turn you off whenever they like, that can be a pretty grievous place to be in, especially if you're a parent with children. So, again, this isn't stuff that is simply limited to people who have already recognised a degree of emotional incapacity or mental disability in themselves, let alone necessarily gone and seen the doctor about it. Shaziz kindly confessed to having lived a life of secret poor mental health and long spells of depression, and he said that I was probably the first. Well, we were the first people that he'd told ever, and that's a big admission for somebody of of our age. It's a big admission to make to yourself. This is another thing as well, is that we often don't like to say these things out loud, or which is something I'll be getting onto, or at least internally speak them aloud. That which we dare not call its name. So we've got the two hemispheres of the brain, and when we are in a traumatic situation, certain barriers, certain cognitive barriers are thrown up by the mind in self-defence against the situation. This can be, if we're witness to a fight breaking out, sometimes you'll find yourself in almost like a frozen moment where you're incapable of moving. The rabbit in the headlights moment. That can be quite a traumatic experience, because essentially all of your hormones are raging for you to either leap into the fray and to beat the crap out of somebody, or to leg it in the other direction. And in the sort of dichotomy of decisions, the body gets kind of caught up, and the hormones will run rampant, and you'll experience all of the sensations of having leapt into the fight or actively running away, but you'll be stuck still on the spot, and that this can be quite a damaging thing. And this is quite important as well, is that if we're in a persistent anxiotic state, if we have persistent anxiety problems, which was one of my issues, we end up in this state called hypervigilance, which is essentially where the bang of a car door outside will make you jump out of your skin. You home in on every last nuance of what people are saying and try to interpret, vast swathes of meaning out of the merest coincidental, casual conversation. You'll see significance in all sorts of scary ways of things that are out to get you. And again, like I say, when our thoughts are our own, our thoughts are our thoughts, and that when we are suffering from less than lucid thinking capacities, then it's very hard to distinguish one's normal thought patterns from these kind of erroneous, random error messages that are being thrown up in this kind of fight or flight state. And again, these are all quite normal, natural, physiological responses for an animal that would be living the lifestyle that we as prey and hunter-gatherers would have evolved through. And so our physiques, our physical bodies are designed to sustain this incredible outbursts of energy when it's needed. You know what I mean? We've all heard the stories of, the archetypal stories of the mother lifting the 2-ton car off of the crushed child when she normally would struggle to carry the bags of shopping in from the same car, coming home on a Saturday. I've experienced it. The warp spasm, the slain like adrenaline rage, where you can literally I've torn my own muscles in blind rage when it's struck. And this is just, you literally are so flooded with adrenaline that all physical constraints, the fight or flight scenario was developed by the body to respond to imminent death or danger. And so all of, your hair stops growing, your nails stop growing, your immune system shuts down, your pupils dilate to collate as much light as possible, your hearing becomes much more acute, and this is where sort of tinnitus comes from in stress states, that the adrenaline causes tinnitus simply because the ears are turning up their internal amplification, and in the absence of any signal, in the absence of anything to actually hear of any great import, it just turns the signal up a bit more. There must be something out there scary that I've got to listen to. I've got all this adrenaline. Where's that scary thing I need to hear? And if you imagine that kind of exported to all of your physical senses, that's really essentially what we're talking about here with an anxiety state, is varying layers up to, a full-on panic attack, which would essentially mimic the physical responses of epilepsy in some degrees. It can be that severe. And this is simply just levels, and I think again we're looking at the rate of change of level. So if we're suddenly plunged into a shocking situation and we're in this kind of hypervigilant state, the sudden rush of adrenaline is the dangerous thing. I think that if these things kind of creep up on us slow, we can kind of adjust. It's a bit like the boiling frog in the water, not jumping out the pan if you raise the temperature of the water slowly enough. That our psyches are very much programmed like this to respond to sudden change. And again, this is physically very harmful to the anxiotic and to the depressive. To be in this hypervigilant state for any length of time is incredibly draining on the body, and can lead to both extremes, really. It can lead to, almost anorexia-like thinness due to the constant repeated demands of your nerves for activity, and this just being incredibly energy hungry. And if you don't, replace that energy, if you don't replenish that nervous energy with food, then the body starts to go into breakdown. Or alternatively, this constant agitation of the nerves informs the body that a threatening situation is imminent, and one will start to load up body fat. So people will often bloat up and put on lots of weight in stressful situations. When you add to this the effects of many of the psychiatric medications on things like appetite and on levels of body fat in different parts of your body, you can see how what somebody may consider to be an eating problem may in fact be absolutely nothing at all to do with the food that they're putting past their teeth, but simply this kind of persistent physiological state that they've found themselves in. So anyway, back to this CBT. I'm hoping to kind of illustrate a model. This is really only a model. This isn't really how the brain works, but this is just simply a way of describing the functions in such a way that we end up with a visual representation, a mental image of what it is that's happening. And if you imagine that all of your kind of right side of your body is hook wired to the left side of your brain, and all of your left side of your body is hook wired to the right side of your brain, then your brain has got this kind of bridge in between. It's corpus collecti, I think it's called. I could be completely wrong there, but essentially it's like a small network bridge between the two hemispheres. In fact, there's been some treatment of very severe cases of epilepsy by actually physically severing that part of the brain, so that the right and left hemispheres are actually fully disconnected, and so erroneous signals that could spill over into full temporal lobe epilepsy are essentially maintained in the hemisphere that they spawn from, and can't propagate throughout the brain, leaving the epileptic with at least half a functioning brain with which to be able to remain conscious. And obviously for somebody that's having repetitive temporal lobe epileptic fits and injuring themselves and risking death with each one, this could be a huge surgical intervention, a successful surgical intervention from what I've looked into. It's not the sort of thing that you'd necessarily want to consider, is it, having somebody stick a scalpel in your brain and cut the bit that connects it together, but that's what they do. But anyway, this collective bridge between the hemispheres is very important, because it atrophies and becomes de-emphasised with this separation out of our artistic sides and our intellectual sides by the driving of the education system, and, like I say, the kind of make-up of modern society and our roles in it. And what tends to happen is that we compartmentalise various elements of our life into one hemisphere or the other hemisphere, and so as a consequence that part of our memory, that part of our active thoughts, is sustained within a half-functioning brain, within only the artistic side, or only within the logical rational side. And that really, for any thought to be complete, it needs to have been considered and analysed by both halves of the brain. That this is essentially it, that the reason it would appear that our brain is set up almost like a parallel computer, where we put two identical inputs into two completely different computers, but with essentially the same programs running on each, and then compare the output. And it's from the compared output that we get a realistic impression of the world around us. So you can see that in the absence of this comparative analysis of the throughput of our minds, we can end up with a very biased picture. There's no error checking in a one-sided thought, in a one brain, one hemisphere sided thinking. The analysis doesn't get done, so we can logically work on that thought, but the comparative analysis with the other side of the brain is absent from that picture. And as a result, if error does creep in, if what we perceive isn't what's really happening, and like I say, because of this tendency to believe our own thoughts above all else, that when this error creeps in, when this discrepancy between reality and our thoughts creeps in, that this can basically dial back in to the same damage and reinforce that damage with more one-sided brain thinking, and almost create like a log jam on that side of the mind. And suddenly we may find ourselves with our left, with our right logical brain completely overwhelmed by the log jam of unassociated thoughts, of non-error corrected thoughts, of non-hemisynced, parallel, error checked thoughts. And we can find our logical side being completely corrupted by this, and we become incapable of coherent thought. And so we flit from, we know that we know how to think, we know that we used to be able to think, we know that we still appear to be able to think, but our thinking doesn't work quite. It's a bit like riding a push bike with a wonky cog, that every couple of times around it clunks. It's you can feel that there's something not quite right, but in the absence of comparison, there's no real way of knowing quite what is wrong. And so often we find ourselves in these, or people suffering from, I have found myself in this state, and from discussing these states with other people, I feel that a lot of other people find themselves in these states where they're trapped into a pattern of thinking and of a pattern of behaviour that they don't really understand. They don't really understand where it came from. They don't really understand why it's there, and they don't seem to be feel capable of overcoming it. And this is exactly the issue here, right? Is that in order to be able to overcome an error-laden right hemisphere, we have to connect it to its component part on the left, and that this is where CBT comes in. Now, if you're in a position of being burdened by emotional outbursts or moods that don't seem to be associated with anything that's happening in the here and now, but aren't necessarily associated with any memories, what I'd advise you to do is, now this is best done longhand. You could sit and do this at the computer because it doesn't matter, writing is writing, but because writing out longhand engages your creative side much more vigorously than simply writing, because you're writing and you're having to imagine the words, imagine the scenarios that you're writing about. This fully engages the artistic, creative side of the brain, and essentially write down. To do a full CBT workout, one would write down one's entire life history in as full a detail as one could manage without obviously going to an entire autobiography. And having written out longhand everything that you can remember, every detail that you can remember, every significant thing from your active memory of the past that you can write out longhand on the page. And then here's the key: you read it back to yourself out loud. And here's the important part: you must read it out loud. You don't have to read it to anybody else. Nobody else needs to hear your innermost thoughts. Okay, you don't need to go to a psychiatrist, you don't need a counsellor, you don't need expensive therapy. Write your life history down, read it back out to yourself. Even better if you can record yourself reading it back out to yourself, and then listen to that recording afterwards, and you will be absolutely astounded. I mean, I would even recommend this to anybody that has never suffered a blue day in their life, has never even considered themselves to have any sort of emotional or mental instability, that this writing out your life history and reading it out loud, the hemisync just brings unbidden memories, just complete forgotten chunks of your life to vivid, three-dimensional, touch it, taste it, smell it reality. And for me, it saved my life. I can't express this any stronger. It saved my life. It removed the crushing, overriding, overarching emotional states that I would find myself in, unbidden, unexplained, without any associated active memory that I could refer to. Suddenly, all of these emotional states suddenly had their apportioned, rational, logical explanation. And not only that, but I remembered things about my family and the kind of turmoil that we were in. And there was some really interesting things that came up. I think it was one of the things about my father. And I remember suddenly remembering this incident where he'd shown this huge weakness of character, where he'd always been, for the few short years that he was living at home with me and my mum, he'd always been this big lorry driving, beer drinking. And I remember this moment of weakness, and this moment of weakness suddenly became the explaining this moment, remembering this moment of weakness in him, suddenly explained for me almost the entire explanation of why he'd left my mother and what had driven him away was suddenly crystallised in just that one small thought about his one moment of weakness. And I can't explain to you how all of that can logically be deduced from such small thoughts. But trust me, this is the incredible power of hemisyncing, of synchronising your left and right brain hemispheres by writing things down and reading them out aloud. Is that there is another layer of decoding, de-patterning of the emotional landscape of your past life in that moment, and suddenly that decoupling or recoupling of the two components of your life, the logical and the emotional, we suddenly find ourselves perhaps back in a moment in the past remembering a childhood incident where certainly as a boy I would probably have used logic and reason to explain something that to me as a child would have been inexplicable and misunderstood, and I would completely reject the emotional content of that experience. And so through this hemi-syncing, suddenly the emotional and the logical recollections are reunited, and as a whole suddenly they throw this light of completeness on the complexity of all of these emotional interactions that it had, from active memory, from trying to remember them, had given me nothing over a huge length of time. And for me this was particularly pertinent because most of my trauma really ended by the time I was 6 or 7, and was not really that great deal of trauma on the scale of the sort of traumas that people can suffer, but relatively traumatic. But that because my adult life issues had really stemmed from this period, suddenly being able to access these childhood memories that had been excluded by the blockading of the trauma, the wishing not to remember of it all. It unlocked all of that trauma. It was suddenly all out in the light of day, and not only that, but in a new clarity, with a new completeness that it had lacked before. So yeah, very, very powerful tool, and I really do strongly advise anybody just to give it a go, just out of interest. Just get back to me, see what you come up with from that, because I'll be fascinated to know. Right, I'm going to chuck another tune on because my errant child has not subsequently made me a cup of tea, regardless of by shouting at him kindly through the door to do so. I could shout again, but I think I probably need to mute out or deafen you all. Right, so where were we? Cognitive behavioural therapy. So I've covered fairly thoroughly the subject of the written hemisync, the written word method of hemisyncing, and explain that this is a much more powerful reprogramming tool than just something that you can necessarily use as a combatant to mental disorder or emotional disability. To add to this, we are told by the scientists that once we are 7 or 8 years old, we have our full pattern of synapses, and that from 7 years old to 21 years old, essentially it's a paring back process, that the process of childhood essentially delivers unto us many, many more synaptic connections than are necessary for our, like I say, our automata, like our robotic existence. And so as muscle programming, as reflex responses are slowly dialed in and honed to perfection by the child's body in a perfect synaptic map of those physical activities, routings in the brain are established because of the need for conscious control of the child's limbs, and every aspect of the child's life is essentially permanently under conscious control at that age because of the developing child's faculties. And as a result, we end up with this hugely over-complex neural network by the time we're 7 years old, much, much more complex than we would need as adults, or may consider that we would need as adults. And so what happens from 7 to 21 is a period of atrophying, where selectively we disregard those unused parts of the brain that are no longer required to coordinate, hand-to-eye movements once they become automated, once they become dialed in, once they become subconscious. The requirement for the neural pathway that was required to consciously control those actions in the learning process up to 7 years old are no longer needed, and essentially those synaptic paths atrophy, i.e. wither, and are eroded away by the processes of cellular replenishment over the 7-year cycle. Which is actually another key point, that there is a 7-year physical cycle where every cell in your body is more or less replaced once every 7 years. Obviously not all at once, because we'd look pretty shabby every 7 years otherwise. I tend to look pretty shabby most of the time, if the truth be told. Like I say, the scientists will tell you that from the age of 21, your neural network map is fixed and unalterable, and also any physical damage, any physical severing of any of those neural network paths will be permanent and irreparable. Well, I'm here as standing testament that that patently isn't true, or at least is partially untrue. That essentially the neural paths from, let's say, one's hands to the appropriate part of the brain are very much like the rivulets of a pre-stream runoff of water from a spring down a hill, and essentially the nerve impulse will be received by the receptor at the fingertip, and it will travel the most direct path to its appropriate point in the brain. But if that direct path is obstructed or isn't the quickest path, or isn't running at speed, that nerve signal will pretty much find a way if there is a connection between it and the a part of the brain. And that what I suspect may happen is that in fact if we sever minor nerves around our body, that what would appear to happen is that nerve will simply find a different neural path from your finger to your head. And initially, what I tend to find is that after basically I've severed a whole bunch of nerves. I've dropped 2-ton plates of steel on my fingers. I've caught my fingers in guillotines. I've run them over in cars, smashed them with hammers. I've severed quite a few bits and pieces of my hands and lost all sensation in them for a period of time accordingly. And each time the doctor has assured me that unfortunately this loss of sensation is most likely going to be permanent, seeing as our nerves don't regrow. And in each one of these cases I have returned to full sensation, fully sensate, after a period of about 7 years. Now the intriguing part about this is that after the initial phase of complete insensitivity, of complete numbness, of a lack of sensation from the affected area, that after about 5 or 6 years, suddenly you'll start to get like stabbing pains from somewhere that's completely insensate, somewhere that you haven't felt anything from for years. And these will often be accompanied by sort of pins and needles, tingling, feeling cold, feeling hot, just a kind of whole, almost like a suite of nerve signals, but without any visible impulse. And after this initial period of sometimes quite painful kind of reactivation of that nerve, what I suspect has happened is that nerve has largely remapped to a new part of the brain, and that this is again this dialing in, this kind of honing of the synaptic response to remap that part of the body to a different synaptic path. So what we see, and also to add to this, the study on potential and current London cabbies, which found that during the process of doing what's known as the knowledge, the test that you have to take to become a London cabbie, which is possibly one of the hardest motoring tests on the planet, licence tests on the planet. The demands on the hippocampus, which is a postage stamp size part of the brain at the sort of base of your skull, at the back of your head, just below the optical cortex, and the hippocampus is responsible for the orientation in three-dimensional space, the imagining of three-dimensional objects, the mapping of two-dimensional objects into a three-dimensional reality. So essentially for map reading skills, for finding your way, you know what I mean, for being able to get from point A to point B without getting lost. Also when working with tools to imagine to be able to predict the effect of, say, an axe blow requires an ability to imagine a three-dimensional event happening from from the action of a tool. And in these cabbies, essentially the requirement and the demand of activity on the hippocampus during the period of going through the knowledge and becoming a cabbie is so intense that the hippocampus swells by 400% during the process. So there is a clear filling out, a clear engorging of an individual part of the brain due to a selective stimulus in a very selective way. And so this clearly shows that even as adults, our brains aren't these kind of fixed, like the bloody London tube map, you know what I mean, been the same for 20, 30 years. This isn't how it is at all, and that these neural pathways are laid down and removed according to how frequently they're used, and that we can retrain our brains. We can retrain our brains, and that one of the most powerful tools that we've got in retraining our brains is the very same facility that was availed to the newborn child up until the age of 7, where the interaction of mind and body created hardwired neural impatterning that essentially, because of our mostly automata-like robotic behaviours where, we really do, until you analyse all of your behaviour with a mind to how many actual choices you made and how many of those choices that you thought that you were making were actually predetermined and kind of foregone conclusions. It's quite an interesting self-analysis to do. And what I find is that we are largely creatures of habit, largely automated, that most of our what we think of as conscious daily activities is very much, the conscious part of our daily activities is the mere tip of the iceberg, and in fact the busy 90% is in fact going on at an entirely unconscious level, facilitated by hardwired neural systems like the cardiovascular system, where your heart beats without you having to think 120, 121, I'm a bit busy, or I'm quite active now, 136. That's not how it works. Is that it's in a persistent feedback loop with the entire body to accommodate any of the body's changing metabolic needs. And breathing is actually quite an interesting one. The reason why breathing is such an important tool in things like meditation and overcoming anxiety states is because breathing is one of our primary autonomous body physical responses, in as much as we all breathe most of the time entirely automatically. We don't think breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, and less still do we think breathe in, pause, breathe out, pause, breathe in. And in many people, without understanding the importance of the structured breathing and the biofeedback that it has with your synaptic mapping, they can completely miss the point of meditation and exactly what is being achieved through the act of meditation. And that simple act to take a full breath in and pause, and consciously pause. Personally, I'd draw a breath and then hold it consciously until I'm slightly uncomfortable, and then try to breathe out with a controlled out breath, thinking the whole way through the breath, trying to make the breath as even and as smooth and as consistent as possible. On the out breath, I try to breathe out, get to the point where I think my lungs feel empty now, and then know that there will still be a reserve in there, and try to expel that reserve as well, so my lungs are fully emptied, and then pause. And trust me, that pause needs to be a conscious decision, because when you've emptied your lungs completely, your body suddenly goes into almost like a panic state. It's a very emotional sensation. I suppose it's associated with drowning or suffocation. But essentially the holding of the fully expelled out breath and the holding of the pause consciously, just slightly beyond what one is comfortable with, and then again the applied, controlled drawing in of breath, not the sudden gasp of the dying man. You're not dying, you've only paused for 2 or 3 seconds, your body's okay. This is the conscious application of intention, of the conscious mind over the autonomous physical body. And the reason why this is so powerful in meditation, the reason why meditation is so curative, is that this reinforcing of the mind over the physical is a very important thing when we're suffering from illness, when we're suffering from disability, when we're suffering from mental health or emotional health problems. It's very easy to feel victim to our bodies, to feel a casual observer in the events of our lives. And this simple act of controlling one's breath to such a degree where the body is convinced that there's something bad happening, but you, with your conscious mind, know that you are imposing that sensation and are embracing it and are using it and are able to resist the urge to descend into breathless panting and gasping for that perceived lack. And trust me, 5 or 6 breaths is all you need of that very powerful breathing technique to take you out of a very chronic anxiety state. You know what I mean? If you're going into a panic attack, if you're going into an anxiety state, do 5 or 6 full breaths, as full as you can possibly do, fully empty, fully full, controlled. Don't push it till you're gasping. There's no point in that. It's all about control. And you will find that if you can force that intellectual command over your lungs, the response from your mind-body junction will be one of reinforcing your intellectual control over the uncontrollable physical world. And it's an incredibly curative, powerful tool. And as an anxiolic going into the professional video industry when I was still untreated, as it were, uncorrected anxiolic, I would find myself in the most incredibly high pressure work situations where the focus of everybody's eye is upon you in the room, which is never a bloody comfortable place for me. I like to sit in the shadows at the back, mate. And your performance is everybody's experience is your performance in that moment. And I would often, if things started to go wrong, if my mixer blew up, if something terrible happened, I would find that simply by sitting and forcing myself not to react to the situation at all, but simply to sit and take 3 or 4, if I can spare the time, 5, 6 or 7, preferably not enough to make yourself feel a bit dizzy, you know what I mean, because you're obviously at work, I don't want to be passing out. But within that 3 to 5 breaths, you'll suddenly feel a releasing within yourself, an undoing of that tension, and with that undoing of the tension, you'll probably actually find that the solution to the situation that you're immediately presented with will come unbidden into your head. After Mrs. is always bloody telling me, just put it down and stop doing it for a bit, because I'm always building fucking crappy old PCs, I'm cobbling together bits of stereo, cobbling together old dodgy bits of motors, and everything's always on the ragged edge and kind of on its last legs and a bit kind of desperate hope. So as a result, I find myself in all sorts of scrapes from various things that I'm trying to fix or get to work. And we get our nose so pressed up against an issue and are so driven to resolve that issue that we don't step away, we don't stop and take that moment to pause, that moment to breathe. And I, of all people, should know the importance of that, should know the power of that, because I make use of it in another scenario where I'm in a more professional role and acting a different character. And this is the other thing as well, is we do all have these personas. It's not just a single persona, it's a multiple persona. We are actors on the stage, you know what I mean? We don't present the same self to our work colleagues as we do to our drinking buddies, as we do to our lovers, as we do to our pets, our children. I mean, all of these are different masks to present an acceptable face of the underlying self. I think sometimes we get confused between the complexities of some of those masks that we wear. A confusion of characters. Okay, so I think I'm going to go into synaptic remapping, having now done my best to explain the kind of theory. So back to the plot. Was there a plot? If there was, I must have lost it a long time ago. Synaptic remapping. So I've kind of basically outlined how us rational thinking, wonderful intellectual beings that we think we are actually largely automata in our daily lives, and that a mere fraction of all of our intellectual processes are actually really that intellectual. Most of them are simply control signals running on a repeated learnt program. So, essentially the cupboards are empty, that triggers a response to go to the bloody shops. You're thirsty, that triggers a response to go and fill the kettle. You're driving the car, a rising pitch from the engine triggers a response to dip the clutch and put it into another gear. All of these we do without actually thinking. We may think that we think about them, but if you actually observe yourself, and the number of occasions that you'll find yourself to have been able to have done all of these things perfectly competently without having the slightest self-awareness of having done them. I give the example of driving back with my son from university recently and doing 90-something miles in the car without being slightly aware of even being in the car, let alone being the driver, doing in excess of 70 miles an hour for 90 miles in heavy traffic. So essentially we are these learnt muscle memory automata running subroutines like some insane robot largely, and that these subroutines are loaded, these programs are loaded into the miasmic neural network that makes up the brain and the central nervous system. And the number of potential interconnectedness, the number of potentially interconnected points in the human brain through the synapses is inconceivable. I mean, I think there's something like 3 trillion synapses in the adult brain. If you can imagine that each one of those synapses could reference every other synapse via one or other of the synaptic pathways, then you have a computing capacity beyond any supercomputer that not only could we dream of, but that we could probably dream of dreaming of. Certainly nothing that we're going to build in the near future. This whole thing about, oh yeah, we're getting close to artificial intelligence. Are we feck? Not happening. Not even close. We're replicating small components of what would appear to be a reasoned response from what's essentially software subroutines, but it's nothing in comparison with the incredible complexity of the human brain allied to the human senses and the human central nervous system. Stick that up your cybernetic pipe and smoke it. So essentially we have the physical body and its interactions with the physical world mapped in this three-dimensional geometric lattice work of the brain's synapses, and that each of these pre-programmed responses will be held like a switchboard routing for a telephone call in an old-fashioned telephone exchange. It will be held in the synapses as a reinforced routing, and the way that the synapses achieve this is by increasing, engorging the size, the capacity, and therefore lowering the resistance of the flow of the synaptic responses to the between the synapses by basically putting in bigger and smaller pipes. So the more a synaptic route is used, the bigger a pipe it will be given to transmit that synaptic message more effectively, and a route that is used less frequently will be given a gradually smaller and smaller pipe. It's a bit like your front side bus in the computer. It's a bit like having faster and slower front side buses fitted to the parts of your internal computer that require greater or lesser computing capacity. Again, one has to remember that the brain is the most oxygen and blood hungry organ in the body, and something like 2/3 of all of the blood throughput is there purely to deliver the fuel to drive this incredible organ of thought at the top of our bloody bodies. So we have this neural remapping where our physical actions are physically mapped, modelled by these synaptic telephone exchanges, and that these telephone exchanges prefer the networks that are used more often. So, you know what I mean, a synaptic pathway that's used more often will be given more and more bandwidth, as it were. And so what we can see here is that in the presence of compulsive behaviour, or of repeated or cyclic behaviour, or self-destructive behaviour, that we can see how the neural map for that can drive that behaviour beyond the intellectual command of the person experiencing that behaviour. So once we have established these hardwired neural networks, that the unhardwiring, the dismantling of that network intellectually can be a very hard thing to do. And it is possible. I was actually talking to a great friend of mine last night about this very subject. It is possible to do, to become so self-aware and in each moment that one can be the gatekeeper of one's own thoughts. And if one can become the gatekeeper of one's own thoughts, then one becomes the master of yourself. If you're looking to become sovereign, if you're looking to become freeman of yourself first. You must become sovereign unto yourself. I am that I am. And be aware of who it is that you are. And that in this, like I say, this is an intellectual exercise. And again, I can't stress enough that the brain is an incredibly energy-hungry device. And so in normal day-to-day living, we wouldn't place this much undue stress on an already overworked organ. But if we're facing difficulties, or if we want to accomplish new skills, then becoming entirely present in the moment, becoming the observer of our own lives, is like a muscle that needs to be exercised. We're very automated, and that automation is done for a reason. It's because the world that we inhabit is a very complex world, and we have to decode it at an incredibly rapid rate. And so if we were to get the full bandwidth data of everything, we would be walking around like dazed idiots most of the time. Perhaps some of us already do. So we have these inbuilt filters that can be corrupted and co-opted by traumatic situations, and involved in the establishment of hardwired, pre-programmed physiological responses and emotional component, and that these can be very difficult to overcome intellectually. And so this is where the CBT, the Cognitive Behaviour Therapy, the physical side of CBT comes in, where essentially if we find ourselves, what tends to happen is we will have an erroneous thought, an unpleasant thought, an unbidden thought, and that unbidden thought will trigger an emotional response. That emotional response will trigger a deepening of the mood, a darkening of the mood, which will make the unpleasant emotional response all that much stronger. And before long we find ourselves in a situation where we want to make ourselves feel better. Yeah, we don't like feeling bad. It hurts. So we try and make that pain go away. And in our attempts to make that pain go away, we will usually act out a pre-patterned behaviour, probably something from our childhood, a coping strategy, some set of actions that we predetermine will ameliorate that. You know what I mean? Maybe going down the pub, you know what I mean? I don't know, shouting at the dog, going out and driving the car like a lunatic. I don't know, there are all sorts of things. Compulsively washing one's hands in the case of somebody who suffers from OCD. Now, the secret with the physical version of CBT is that if we become this master of our own thoughts, gatekeeper of our own mind, and passive observer of our own thinking patterns, then if we are able to catch the initiating erroneous thought, the initial painful memory, the initiator in this thought through to action pattern, and if we can catch that, if we can observe it, it's unlikely that in the initial stages you will be able to prevent the emotional component, so expect to feel bad anyway. Right, there's not a great deal I can do about that. That will come with practice. But initially, if you are able to observe the initiating thought, the initiating trigger thought that sets off the emotional cascade that leads to the physical response, you can recognise through the strength and the persistence of the emotional sensation the potential onset of the physical response, i.e., I don't know, I've just remembered my dead mum, I really want a drink, I'm probably going to go out and buy myself a drink. Well, you can intercept at that point, and if instead of going out to buy a drink you recognise that that would be your normal pattern of behaviour, and simply invent a different behaviour to do, walk to the park, take the dog out for a walk, run up and down the stairs 3 times. It really doesn't matter. Yeah? You know what I mean? Go and face the corner and sing la la la. It really doesn't matter what you do as long as you don't do the thing that it is that you normally do. And this is the important thing. Okay, now this sounds really silly. This sounds farcical perhaps to be, you know what I mean, talking in these terms about serious things like mental health. But this could save you from suicide if you're in this dark place. Right? That if you can recognise the physical component of this neurological network and take an intellectual interceding role in the play of that initiating erroneous thought and its physical consequences, then you basically enter as an intellectual component in what had been a completely automated biofeedback loop. And having interceded in that biofeedback loop, you cut off that return supply to that synaptic pathway, and slowly, and it will be slowly, you will be able to erode those synaptic pathways intellectually, intentionally, discreetly, without anybody having to know about it. This is all internal. This is all becoming your own corridor monitor. You know what I mean? No running in the halls, kind of thing. And moreover, that this isn't just something that applies to one's mental health. What I've discovered about this becoming the disembodied observer is that this is also entirely involved with your physical health. I no longer suffer from colds because I've worked out, I discovered, at least for myself, I hope it works for you lot, that the actual thing that gives you the cold is that, oh no, I'm coming down with a cold thought. And that becoming this disembodied observer in my own mind, I was able to observe that thought, try and transit my conscious mind one time, and I kind of caught it in midair. Gotcha! And it went unthought. I kind of, oh no, and I knew what was coming next, and I grabbed that thought before the thought could be thought. I was the hall monitor, you know what I mean, stopping that thought from running in the corridors, and I didn't get a cold. And I've utilised that technique every time I've felt the slightest symptoms of a cold. I've simply acknowledged my immune system's responding to some kind of environmental cue and thanked it very kindly, often out loud, because I think, again, this is important in the CBT model, that saying things out loud that one might ordinarily only say internally is actually a very powerful force in this kind of remapping capability. And like I say, if one monitors one's mind, one finds that the mind's ability to create the reality that you experience is far more powerful than you could ever have imagined before you start to really take an active part in the creation and the experiencing of that reality, and what and why you create out of that reality from your kind of desire and intent. Blimey, 2 hours. My throat's dry as a bone. I've still got some tea left though, haven't I? I have a dry throat and tea. That's antithetical. Illogical. It's illogical, Captain. I know I've been playing a load of tunes today, but I've got 3 hours to fill, and like I say, driving back from bloody Chesterfield at crack at dawn this morning, so not exactly much time to prepare programme notes for a programme like this, so it's all coming straight off the top of my head, I'm afraid, but like I say, this is a subject very dear to my heart, and one that I've studied many of the kind of traditional psychiatric doctrine, the Jungs and the Freuds and the Reichs about it, and also having been both witness, patient and victim to the British psychiatric institutions, I've experienced enough of it from this side of my eyeballs to hopefully be able to speak with some experience on the subject, some understanding of a very difficult subject. I mentioned Wilhelm Reich in the list of 3 psychiatrists that I mentioned just before the tune break there. Jung, Freud and Reich, if you look in the paperwork, were all from the Austrian School of Psychiatry. Freud is probably the most well known due to his theories about human sexuality and the nature of neurosis. He was known as the father of psychiatry by his peers, and Reich was actually Freud's understudy. He was a student at the Austrian School of Psychiatry when Freud was a professor there, and Reich was such a keen student of Freud's work that he soon became head of department, and by the time he had graduated himself as a doctor of psychiatry, he had reformulated most of Freud's theories on human sexuality and reframed the entire field of psychiatry into the new realm of psychotherapy, or talking therapy, which is what I've been discussing this evening. And in fact, although you'll find his name nary mentioned in any modern textbook taught to up-and-coming psychiatrists, you will actually find that about 90% of what they are taught by way of therapeutic interactions with the patients will indeed be of a Reichian concept. So let's examine what Reich discovered. If you want to research it, I'll leave you to go into research how he discovered all of this. Reich was a rigid adherent to the strict scientific method as was laid down in the day, and would never reach a conclusion or draw scientifically significant results from his data without having fully corroborated his findings himself, and that dedication to the scientific method actually led him up some very strange avenues that I would suggest that many a scientist of his day would have balked at and would have stayed within their field of expertise. But as a result, Reich's research spanned a huge field of human endeavour. But essentially, his biological theory was based on his investigations into the physical drives of things like amoeba, of microbes. He realised that essentially that our central nervous systems were merely the evolved central nervous systems of single-celled organisms, and that obviously the motives and drives of a single-celled organism are an awful lot easier to understand, measure and to quantify than the actions of a complex thing like a human being. So he studied at great length the motive directives behind an amoeba. Now, with an amoeba, it extends a tentacle into its environment, and that tentacle has no eyes, it has no ears, it doesn't have a nose, it simply has pores on the surface of that tentacle, and those pores will have electrochemical stimuli, electrochemical sensors, like your nostril hairs, I guess, which will be attracted or repelled by positive or negative electrical polarity, and that essentially the amoeba, the microbe, utilises this difference to define whether the area that it's extending its tentacle into may be in the proximity of food, or it may be in the proximity of a threat. If it detects the proximity of a threat, it immediately retracts the tentacle and tries poking out another tentacle from some other part of its body in a different direction. If it detects a potential food source, then what it actually does is it pours its entire body into the profitable tentacle. And this is how the amoeba kind of moves around the world. And what Reich very quickly realised, that what essentially he was observing was a physiological drive, apparently a autonomous thinking, reacting creature responding purely to electromagnetic, electrochemical stimuli. And so he began to examine how this threw light over the wealth of human experience. And he realised that although he could find some measurable electrical conductivity, electrical resistivity differences on the human skin and in the human nervous system in response to emotional responses or physiological stimuli, much like the lie detector relies on how sweaty your skin gets in response to stress to determine whether or not you're lying or telling the truth. And Reich went, Reich, ever the scientist, and like I say, his true field was that of psychiatry, looking into the sexual drives and their implications in emotional and mental health. Realised that all of our emotional responses are essentially like that amoeba's, that we tend to pour ourselves into our chosen response. So if we perceive something as grievous, we will pour ourselves into that grief, or if we see something as wonderful, we'll pour ourselves into that wonderment. And that he saw that these were two very polaric opposites. And when he began to examine how these were represented amongst his patient group, seeking sort of therapy and counselling for their mental infirmities, was that most of the patients that he seemed to be presented with appeared to have this kind of drawn, thin, haunched characterology, physiology, and that many of the kind of happy, jolly people that he would see around would completely lack this inwardness, this inward pointedness of both physique and intellect, of emotional kind of inwardness. And as a result, he actually went on to examine the physical characteristics of both a large group of patients that had been presented with mental health problems, but he also took the genius step of going out and taking exactly the same measurements of a group of population who apparently weren't affected by any sort of mental affliction, thereby creating the first ever baseline analysis to be a comparative baseline in order to be able to measure your efforts to help the afflicted, which is something that had never occurred to Freud. Anyway, through Reich's work in sexual health and mental health, mental well-being and therapy, and his wide-ranging scientific inquiries, he began to realise that what he was referring to, what he was referencing with this apparent observation of these inward and outward personalities, was that what he was dealing here with was an energetic flow, but that this energetic flow didn't appear to be measurable on even the most sensitive of electronic devices that he could conjure. He would try to measure it magnetically, electronically, you know what I mean, measure it for temperature changes, and although some of these responses could be measured, they were by no means the rule by which one could calculate the amount of the flow of this particular energy. And so he began to consider the possibility, obviously he wouldn't have been the first to have mooted this, but began to seriously consider the possibility of there being an unmeasurable energy associated with biology. And most of his researches from that date then went on to essentially uphold this point that what the Asian mystics would describe as qi, what the dowsers would refer to as ley line energy, if they're dowsing ley lines, is essentially this bioenergetic force, this something that can't necessarily be measured or accurately measured electromagnetically or electromechanically or thermomechanically, but its influence can be observed. The direction of its influence can be observed, and that what Reich found was that most of his mentally ill patients were of this kind of neurotic mindset where they were constantly self-observing their own discomfort and analysing their own discomfort and measuring that discomfort as to how it was affected by their interactions with their fellow man. When he examined the emotional landscape of the healthy people that he investigated, that this introversion was largely absent, and that in fact most people who appeared to be emotionally buoyant in fact almost disregarded their own well-being and were almost entirely focused on the well-being of their fellow man. And so he basically labelled these two polaric opposites as orgastic and neurotic. And these terms are very specific to Reich and shouldn't be confused with any ordinary application of those words. In this respect, the neurotic mind is the introverted, the inward-pointed, the arrow, the flow arrow, the directional flow arrow of the bioenergetic field is towards the person. And in the orgastic or the healthy person, that this flow was in fact outwards, and that the two were mutually incompatible but very mutually exchangeable. So we might find ourselves changing from being persistently introverted and neurotic to suddenly being converted to an entirely orgastic, expressive, expansive state by some small kindness or you know what I mean, a big fat cheque landing on the doorstep when you're in financial difficulty or whatever. And we find these sudden, immediate role reversals where you're suddenly left with no trace of this previous emotional state, and that it has been entirely replaced by this new emotional state. And here we see the amoebic pouring of the entirety into the extended tentacle, into the profitable tentacle. And once one recognises in oneself the the predilection for one direction flow or another, and the understanding of the nature of that flow and where that energy comes from, you soon begin to recognise that if you're suffering from feeling bad, if you're suffering from some kind of depression, if you're anxious, then the last thing on your mind would be to go off and try and help somebody else out, or to do some kindness for somebody else. But this is exactly something that you can use as a very powerful tool for this, because, like I say, this directional arrow can only point in one direction. So you can take conscious control over where that personal directional arrow of yours is pointing, and having taken intellectual control over it, you can entirely change your mood simply by changing your internal directional arrow. So, I mean, and it really works. Another practical method as well, something that I came out of school almost completely innumerate, really almost terrified of number, but slowly over the years my need for math and my intrigue at some of the more kind of curiosity bits of math have led me to a better and better understanding of it, even if not a greater and greater ability to use it, because my innumeracy is still currently at very much CSE grade D level, I guess, which I think is what I got from school. But I have paid a lot of interest to things like statistics and probability in that sort of curiosity about maths, because these seem to be areas where maths seem to be a clear science of choice, where providing that statistical data was gathered neutrally and examined neutrally, then the statistical outcome of that analysis was valid and worthy of study. And first of all, in that study, you have to understand the nature of statistics and the nature of probability. If I were to take a question like, I've just thrown a playing dice 4 times, and each time it has landed with the number 6 facing upwards, what is the least likely number to land facing upwards when I throw the dice next? And the majority of people would be quite comfortable with saying that would be the number 6, then that you are least likely to throw another 6 after a sequence of 4 sixes. Now, however improbable a sequence throw of 4 sixes, or 5 sixes in this case, in a row may be, the probability of a 6 with each throw of the dice remains unchanged. So the actual probability of throwing any particular number on that last throw of the dice is identical. It's 1 in 6. So in fact there's as much likelihood of throwing another 6 as there is of throwing any other number. And so this misunderstanding of we tend to want to see patterns in everything, and this is again part of the automation of the human mind, and this kind of like sort of synaptic programming is that we become impatterned in the way that we recognise things, and we become impatterned in the way that we process those recognised things. And because of this, we see significance where none exists, and we see patterns where none exist. And all of us can know of a time when we've seen faces in clouds, or a feature in a rock formation that looks exactly like an animal, or whatever in profile. But you can understand how the mind will project a recognisable set of parameters on an irrational set of inputs, because this is how the mind kind of constructs the world from the data that it perceives. Where are we? 23:34. Blimey. Right, so where was I going with this then? Right, in summation, I suppose, worst ways, nothing is easy. That's just a simple fact. Certainly the understanding the Reichian concepts of neurosis and orgasticism are hugely important in the ability to overcome the fluctuations of mood, the ebb and flow of life. Like I say, though, I think that the ebb and flow, the yin and the yang, are entirely essential in order to be able to have said that one has lived a full life. And so embracing the low points rather than using, what could potentially be kind of Reichian avoidance techniques, if one's going towards the depths of depression, that it may be possible to actually prevent that depression entirely by maintaining an intellectual hold over one's Reichian directional compass. But indeed, it may not necessarily be that that's the healthiest thing to do. But if you are in a situation where you are persistently troubled by antiquated emotional states that aren't necessarily connected or appropriate for the current time being, then it may be entirely appropriate to simply apply that kind of Reichian orgastic neurotic rule to your life and endeavour to always maintain an orgastic outlook. A glass half full kind of guy sort of attitude is really, unfortunately, as simplistic as that may sound, that's about what it comes to. The cognitive behavioural therapy, the written and spoken word part of cognitive behavioural therapy, like I say, even if you've got absolutely nothing wrong with you at all, even if you're the happiest bunny on the planet, I would strongly recommend that one tries that, writing out a brief sort of life history, longhand, on paper, and reading it aloud, preferably taping it, and preferably listening back to that tape. Just out of just as a little experiment with me, just to find out what pops into your head, because it made so much sense in my life, even areas of my life that I previously thought that I had a pretty good grasp on, most of what had gone into creating them, and just were thrown into a completely new light of completeness, of a like finding that last missing piece of the bloody jigsaw puzzle and just popping it into place, and suddenly you can make out what the picture was all along. Very much a situation like that. Meditation, the importance of meditation, I can't emphasise it enough for physical and mental health. It's fantastically powerful. You really don't have to do the whole sitting in the lotus position, going om. Well, you may want to sit in the lotus position and go om if that's what flips your switch. Personally, I use an open lotus. My knees are too buggered now to actually get anywhere near even a half lotus, so I'm quite happy with just them folded across each other in front of me. Something that I've found important for my meditation practice, and you may find helpful, is a really close intended focus on maintaining one's posture, and maintaining one's posture in an absolutely perfect pose. Try and recreate the musculature and the shape that you would have had as a young child. Sit bolt upright, align your back so that every inch of it is as squarely set and as vertically positioned. Basically, the idea is that you want to place your pineal gland stacked on top of all of your other chakras, right the way down to your first chakra in Uranus. And if you can get all of those into a perfect ruler straight line, which isn't actually a straight line, it's an S-curve, because chi energy doesn't travel in straight lines, it's a fluctuation, that you will find remarkable things happen. If you can do some of the cyclic breathing techniques, the controlled breathing, and manage to align your posture correctly so that all of your chakra points are in perfect alignment, are all in a straight line with each other. Like I say, your body will be slightly S-curved, but your chakra points will all be aligned. You will find that a light bulb will switch on in your head. It's a very strange experience. That's probably the best description I can give of it. It's literally like having your head illuminated from the inside. And I would suggest that it's possibly where the term illumination comes from. And certainly, yeah, the heightened awareness that accompanies that state of perception allows one to think so much more clearly on the kind of day-to-day drudgery. And the other fantastic thing as well is that if you, again, with this neural remapping, if you practice that posture and that breathing technique on a regular basis and for prolonged periods, you know what I mean, for sort of 20, 30 minutes at a go, first of all, you'll find it will be very relaxing, very curative at the time. But what you'll also find is that if you can then get the muscle memory and the synaptic pathways built up to such a state that you can then actually utilise just simply that posture and that breath to induce the same level of calmness, the same level of control, and also quite often the same level of, wow, oh, I've just realised what it was that I wasn't getting. I get it now, sort of sense that seems to accommodate these meditative states. Physical cognitive behavioural therapy, essentially not allowing your body to robotically repeat a physical response to an emotional stimuli. So become the master of your own ship, and if you hear your brain shouting turn left, take a hold of the helm, either steer straight ahead or turn right. Like I say, this is easily enough done. The actual practice of it is difficult, but the actual doing of it is easy, and that is just simply that if you recognise that erroneous thought, that cascade thought starting up, that you simply intellectually step in and divert your body off to go and do something else more interesting instead. And very soon, like I say, you'll find that synaptic path that was creating that set of behaviour and that emotional kind of response is eroded and becomes less of a problem. Won't necessarily always get rid of it, you know what I mean? This is we've all got our demons, and again, don't necessarily expect anything to happen quickly. Although, saying that, if you get it right, I can almost guarantee that you will experience to you, certainly, because when you're in a depressed state, anything other than a depressed state seems bloody miraculous, but it will be effectively a miraculous recovery on your behalf. I mean, this is none of this is difficult. It can be hard, it can be a strain, is probably about the best way to describe it. It can be a strain on one's resources, but if you compare the effort of that strain with the discomfort of the problem that you're suffering, and compare the two, and the strain comes up the easier option, then take the lazy man's option, you know what I mean? Try my way. That's really probably how I got to where I was, that being depressed, being ill, was hard bloody work. And really, when it comes down to it, I'm bloody lazy. So I found the lazy way out by doing it the hard way. But I strongly recommend it for anybody that wants to try. Right, where was I? Okay, we're going to be back on After Midnight with the fantabulous, world-famous Super Duds. He's back from Forvik. Managed to get away without arrest. We're going to be playing tunes into the wee small hours and chatting bollocks as we normally do. What shall I stick on in the meantime? God, there's too much to sit around. The list is just... that'll do. For me, this is my bloody dead air moment.